Today's lesson is Prisoner of Zenda, Chapter 3. We will start with the summary of the chapter. We know that they discovered that the king had been drugged. The drug was in the wine sent by Duke Michael. Since both the king and Resenda looked alike, Seth suggested that Resenda took the place of the king and attended the coronation. Fred thought it was a good idea too. Resenda agreed to take the king's place. Resenda shaved his beard and wore the king's uniform. The king was hidden in a cellar and Joseph was to look after him. The old woman who cooked for them was tied up and left in another cellar. They took the train to Starso. Several ministers and the head of the army of Ruthenia were introduced to Resenda. No one realized that he was not the real king. The coronation procession began. The people of the new town gave the king a rousing welcome. There was hardly any trouble in the old town. Resenda rode bravely down the streets and won the hearts of the townspeople. The procession stopped at the cathedral for the coronation. Resenda was crowned a king. Then Resenda met Black Michael and Princess Flavia for the first time. The princess told him that she found him rather different. Here are some questions and answers. Number 1. What did Colonel Seth and Fritz do to mislead Duke Michael's guards when they arrived at the hunting lodge? The answer is, they decided to go to the station early instead of waiting for Duke Michael's guards. They hid the king in the cellar so that the guards would think no one was there. What did Colonel Seth and Fritz decide to do with Ronan's mother? Why? They decided to lock her in a cellar with the king because she overheard their plan, and she might tell Duke Michael about the king's hiding place. Why was there no one from the past to meet Resenda as a king, and the others at the station instead so? What did Seth decide to do? Because they arrived an hour earlier than was expected, Seth decided to send word to the palace. What could Resenda hear when he was having breakfast at the station instead so? He could hear music and people cheering, "God save the king." Who was Marshal Strankett? He was a very important person in the army. When did Resenda begin to feel less nervous after taking the king's place? When no one seemed to realize that he was not the real king. What did Resenda notice about the capital when he rode through its streets? The city was partly old and partly new. They were wide, modern streets wherein rich people lived in a big house, but behind these was a poor area and narrow streets where the people lived in tiny, old, unhealthy houses. Why was Resenda afraid when he saw Antoinette de Maubert above him on the coronation day? He thought she knew who he was. He thought she would call out, "That's not the real king." What was Seth's reaction when the king suggested getting into the old boat alone? He looked worried and shook his head. According to Resenda, what should the relation between the king and his people like? All of his people should like him, not just a few. Who could Resenda recognize during the coronation? Princess Flavia and Duke Michael. What expression could be seen on Michael's while shaking hands with the king? His hands shook with anger and coldly. What was one of the public's comment on seeing Princess Flavia with the king in a coach? Someone in the crowd called out, "When is the wedding?" "I want the people who live here to see their king trust them." The king said this to Marshall. Thank you for watching.